as always, howdy doody. It's been so long since I've done anything at all for YouTube. Like 2 months. Haven't gotten any new arcade sticks, unfortunately. This might even be a new apartment. I don't know if this apartment has been in a YouTube video. It might not have. It might have. I don't know. Not sure. But what I do know is that a lot of people are getting into fighting games. Like a lot of people are looking to get into fighting games with the release of Tekken 8 and Street Fighter 6 right around the corner, and Guilty Gear Strive getting crossplay and getting an Xbox release, right? It recently got released on Xbox. It's on Xbox Game Pass. It's got full crossplay. First fighting game to ever do it. Huge, right? I think that's really sick. That's a huge step forward for the fighting game industry. And it just kind of broadens the horizons of who you can play with and what kind of games maybe people will look to play, right? Because a lot of times fighting games are very niche, or they feel very niche, because of the fact that the matchmaking is always relegated to one console or PC, never both. And because of that, the player bases start to feel very small, very samey, and a lot of people drop out of the game because it only feels as fun as it feels fresh. Like battle royales, like shooting games, like card games. And I was only thinking about this because I was watching a YouTube video about deck building. I play card games. I like Yu-Gi-Oh! I've watched a little bit of the new One Piece card game. I've watched some of... Oh, my CPU's going crazy over there. I watched a little bit of One Piece, a little bit of the One Piece card game, a little bit of Dragon Ball Super. I played Force of Will, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Those are the card games that I've played. And there was a video I watched about how deck building is hard. About how even beginning the fundamentals of the deck is difficult. Not finding a theme and sticking to it, not finding the best cards in your colors and or leader and or energy cost, whatever. Just literally putting cards into the deck. And I think this kind of relates to fighting games. I think that a lot of people really struggle to create a working game plan in fighting games the same way that people do in something like a shooting game or League of Legends, right? Or a MOBA, right? In shooting games, it's stay near cover, reload when applicable, keep high ground, and always have eyes on the enemy or lanes you think the enemies will come from, right? Like, and those are like very general game plan things that you tell someone who's like trying to play a shooting game. Like, hey, there's cover here. This is like the best spot for high ground. This is like the power position of the map. We should hold this. In 1v1 fighting games, it's a lot harder to figure out that game plan with your character and against the rest of the cast. And I thought about it because after listening to that video and watching it, I realized like I see a lot of people who are very new to Smash, very new to fighting games. I kind of separate them a little bit, but platform fighters and fighters they share some of the same fundamentals. And I've seen a lot of people who are very new to these things not really know where to start. Right? Like people who always say that you need to go into training mode, learn all your tools, learn all your punishes, learn your best setups. How are you even supposed to know what your setups are if you haven't played the video game? Right? And I think that I have a few general tips. For beginners in fighting games. Now, number one is do not be afraid in games where blocking is a thing, because I know some of these platform fighters don't have a block function. And I think there's very few, like very niche case fighting games that don't have a block button. Something like Footsies, I think. Maybe Footsies does have a block button. Dive Kick doesn't. Anyways, can't block in Dive Kick. Brawlhalla, you can't block. And I believe the same thing with Rebels of Aether. You have like a parry button. Try your best, if applicable, to block when necessary, right? You won't always have a chance to be on the offensive. Sometimes being on the defensive can lead to more offensive openings than you think, right? Blocking sucks. Especially in a lot of these newer fighting games. If you guys have ever seen any Guilty Gear Strive, blocking versus Chip Zanoff never feels good. Ever. It never feels good to block versus Chip. But it is a very integral part to figuring out where you can create an opening and fight back against the character. Whether it's he's finally doing a low, he's doing some sort of overhead or aerial attack that you can 6P or anti-air, right? These are things that hold very true in like most modern 2D fighters. So for 2D fighters, do not be afraid to block when applicable and figure out when from there you can create your openings. 2, learn or find block, pressure, and or combo strings, block strings that are either tight or frame traps. What I mean by tight is I mean that your opponent cannot press a button through them and has to hold them. Those strings are perfect for hit confirm ability. What a hit confirm is that you are doing a string or button that has enough stun or enough hit stun or enough delay that you can see that the move is hit and continue your combo further, whether that be with a special move, a super, an RC, an EX move in something like a Street Fighter, Overdrive now. That's the kind of thing that like really helps the building blocks of offense when you get your hit. And then on defense, when it's block pressure, sometimes you want to leave those small gaps. So your opponent can try to counter poke you and then will get counter hit, right? Will try to throw check you through that pressure and will get counter hit. These are very important fighting game concepts that a lot of people just don't think about. They're just like, yeah, I'm just gonna like face roll the controller when they're very new at least. I'm just gonna face roll the controller and whatever cool stuff comes out, I want to try to do that as often as possible. But I think that the best fighting game plans come down or start at the very, very basics. I remember teaching someone Soul Calibur a very long time ago when the game was super new and they were very new to fighting games. And they were like, I like this launcher. This launcher is really cool. This launcher leads to my best damage. And I was like, yeah, you have the offensive part right. You're right. You should use that launcher. I think that's a great idea on offense. But what about when your opponent blocked it a few times? What do you do then? And they're like, well, I don't know. Whenever they block my launcher, I just get hit. And then they start hitting me and I can't stop them. I said, try mixing in lows with that mid launcher to force your opponent to want to crouch to beat the lows. More lows than mids, which unfortunately means you're doing less damage overall, but it means that you're conditioning and forcing your opponent to do what you want them to do. And that's part of a game plan, right? That is a game plan, that is deck building, that is character building when it comes to a fighting game. Is like forcing conditioning or forcing a win condition on your opponent. Speaking of win conditions, establishing a win condition, right? You've played offense. We'll get to defense in a second. We've played offense. We've used block pressure and hit confirmable strings on our opponent, whether it be in a 3D fighter or a 2D, very basically. Now, you can establish a win condition. Your opponent is low enough life that you can pressure them in a way where they are forced into 50-50 or 33, like 1 in 3 chances, right? Between strike, overhead low throw if you have something that fast, or just overhead low, strike throw, cross up, no cross up, right? Things like that. 2D fighter style things also works in 3D fighters because there are a lot of good mids that are the same speed as a throw, right? In something like a Soul Calibur or a Virtua Fighter, there are good lows or decent enough lows that are fast enough that your opponent is standing there waiting for the mid. They have to hold the low and it kills them. In Soul Calibur, we call that the Korean 2K, closing out the game with the 2K constantly. We call that the Korean 2K. I'm not sure why. I guess a lot of Korean players did it back in the day. Pretty funny. Anyways, win conditions are going to vary character to character. So you just want to find your best sequence, your best string, or your best buttons that can lead to a win condition, whether that be a cross-up, a chip setup, a strike throw setup, right? And like whittling your opponent down into that range where it becomes more of a threat means that you can take more control of the game, right? Let's think about it in the sense of Smash, because I've mentioned a few traditional 2D and 3D fighters: Soul Calibur, Guilty Gear, Street Fighter with cross-up, no cross-up, or strike throw, right? That's a very Street Fighter-esque mix-up, very normal. Let's look at something like Soul Calibur. Like Smash. In Smash, there are a lot of buttons that lead into a kill confirm. Higher percentages, say your percentage is very high in Smash, if you get hit by a certain thing like an up tilt or a down tilt or like a neutral air, you can now be hit by the next thing that will kill you, whether that be an up air, a back air, a forward air, another neutral air, depending on the character. Thinking about Palutena by the ring edge. So when you have them in a percentage where you can kill them, now you can fish with that one option over and over to establish some sort of a mix-up game where it becomes strike throw between I'm going to throw you off stage and edge trap you and edge guard you so you can't make it back, or if you're trying to beat the throw by jumping away, by spot dodging, and my hit confirmable button is lingering, which means stays out for a long time, you end up having a nice little win condition established in compact multiple, like 2 or 3 layer options. Now, unfortunately, defense is very hard in fighting games. And I say that as someone who's been playing fighting games for a very long time. I think the thing that most people struggle with whenever I tell them, create a game plan. Create a game plan so that you know what you're doing, so that you know what you're looking for, and you know how to dismantle your opponent. When I say that, most people immediately think of offense, and that's fair because you can't truly win a game with all defense and no offense, right? If you're blocking forever, backdashing forever, dodging forever, jumping out of throws forever, but never pressing an attack button, you will not beat your opponent. So for you mouth breathers in the comment section who are going to say, but if you're defensive and you hit them every time you defend an option, you'll win the game. That's not what I mean. Shut up. I mean, if you're purely defensive, never pressing any buttons in between any of the block pressure your opponent is exerting on you, any of the strike throw, any of the cross-ups, any of the gaps they're leaving for invulnerable moves, you will never win a game. So, best thing to do is find, I'm going to say this first because a lot of games don't have, not all games have invulnerable reversals. If your character has an invulnerable reversal, always keep it in the back of your head. Remember if there's gaps to at least establish it as an option. People say that using invulnerable options is like a crutch and people get used to it and then they never learn how to play defense otherwise. And I'm going to tell you that's a little horseshit. I play a little game called DNF Duel, which is a 2D fighting game made by Aiding and Nexon. Aiding and Arc System Works. And it is essentially kind of an anime game like Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, where there's a lot of good grounded pressure and options, but every character has an invulnerable reversal for the most part. There's a few characters who have counters instead of true reversals. I learned how to play defense even through starting off with my invulnerable reversal, because at a lower level people are going to get hit by that invulnerable reversal. So that's what I'm telling you now. Keep that invulnerable reversal in your mind when your opponent leaves gaps, when your opponent's trying to pressure you with things that aren't true, right? But also learn your fastest options. In Smash, we'll say out of shield. In fighting games, we'll say from block stun. Learn your fastest options, whether that be like a down jab, something in Mortal Kombat like a down 1, whether that be a 2A or a 2K in something like Soul Calibur, a down 1 in Tekken, a standing jab in Tekken, as a matter of fact, 10 frames. Fastest buttons in the game, I believe, generically are 10 frames. Street Fighter, your low kicks, your low punches, right? Your crouching light punch and crouching light kick. Some of the faster options that your character's gonna have, whether they be 4 or 5 frames. Some characters I think even had 3 frames back in the day. Been a long time. Using those buttons to catch people trying to stagger their offense to beat your invulnerable reversal, or to like bait you into trying to like tech a throw or something, is really nice. Also, learning the cheapest shit, the key to all of this, is creating a situation where your opponent knows that they can't continually pressure you on offense. This works in Smash and in 2D fighters, not so much in 3D fighters. Tekken grabs are 10 frames, but they're easy to react to, whether it be right hand or left hand. But in traditional fighters, a lot of them have very fast throws. You can actually use throws as a defensive option for your opponent doing walk-up jab pressure, walk-up, medium punch pressure. You can use that as an option to stop them from doing that and to create a real mix-up instead of just like counter hit fishing, which is, what frame traps are, is they're counter hit fishes. And in that little triangle of mashing, throwing / throw teching, and invulnerable reversals, it makes it so that on defense, you are maybe not as much of a threat as you are on offense, especially depending on the game, but you're more of a threat than just sitting there and only blocking. And I have to make that very apparent because a lot of people think that if you are defensive and if you're a defensive player, that means the only thing you're doing is blocking. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's wrong. You want to be able to make something off of that blocking and off that defensiveness, because if you don't make something off of it, then you're not going to be able to win the game. So, just little highlights. Creating good block pressure or combo strings or gatlings, right? Whether it be you found them on YouTube, your friend did them to you, think they're cool and they work, or you've been labbing enough and you found them yourself. Establishing a win condition, whether that be through chip damage, cross-up setups, strike throw, overhead low, whatever you want to call it, depending on the game, right? And being active on defense. That's literally only 3 things. It took me about 15 minutes to talk about it, 60 minutes to talk about it, but it's because there's a lot of things that go in there, right? I could just say those things, but if I don't explain them to you in a game, maybe you've seen one of these games that I mentioned, maybe you wouldn't know exactly what they mean. A perfect example is in Smash, there's a lot of things that are very punishable on shield with things like forward tilts, things like jab, things like up tilt, or even grab. And if you're only blocking and you're letting your shield whittle down, I commentate Smash, by the way, so I kind of know a little bit what I'm talking about. If you sit there and you let your shield whittle down, one, you can get shield poked. Two, you can get your shield broken, giving your opponent a free way to open you up anywhere on the stage, whether it be towards the ledge and you end up dying, or they just take center stage from you and get a huge punish, right? Something like a fighting game. If you're constantly blocking, in some games there's a block gauge. In some games there's a risk gauge, where if you get hit while that risk gauge is really high, you take more damage. There are games that have guard crush, where if you are blocking for too long, your guard breaks. There are games with chip damage, where every successful, piece of every successful attack that you block or special move that you block, you take small increments of damage, forcing you to kind of try your best to get out of defense, defensively only blocking. That's why I call it active defense, because you've got to try to find those spots where you're going to get hit, but you can mash out. And when I say you're going to get hit, I mean you're going to get hit trying to figure out these spots. And this works for any fighting game, but what I want everyone to wrap their head around is that creating a game plan, being active on defense, finding good offensive pressure, and establishing a winning condition is literally applicable for any fighting game. You just have to figure out how to do it in your game. You're gonna get beat up a lot trying to figure out how to do it. Believe me, I can tell you that right now. As a guy who's learned multiple characters in multiple fighting games, you do not just usually go into a game and become the most successful at it. There's a lot of trial and error. A lot of practice makes perfect, and that's part of the fun. For a lot of people for fighting games, is that it's a journey between you and everyone else trying to get better at the same time as you. So you can either stay a scrub like me, I think I stole that from someone else, or you can venture on and become better at the video game that you chose to put hours of time into. And I won't say how many hundreds of hours, because I know a lot of you, if you've watched any of my fighting game content, probably watch a lot of fighting games and play a lot of fighting games. Anyways, this has been Beanie Thuggish, back with another video. It's been a long time since I've talked about anything fighting game related. Signing out and saying